This is Hindsight in High Heels, conversations for women who have lived, learned, and are still becoming. We explore life transitions, leadership, and how perspective evolves over time. I'm Anne Witkavitch. Thanks for being here. Today, I
Awesome.
am joined by Kisha Zullo, who is a multi-passionate entrepreneur and a women empowerment leader who builds spaces for women to gather with their purpose. So welcome, Kisha. I'm so happy to have you here.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for having me, Anne. I'm ecstatic to be with you and having this conversation. And congratulations on all your success in this podcast. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to start by saying congratulations to you again, because last year, the Women in Business Summit celebrated its 20th year. And that is something that you founded to build that space
Yeah,
of community, and that you've continued to lead it for 2 decades. And I sat in the audience.
incredible.
I would not have missed it for the world because I remember the early days, and I was listening to you share the story. And
Hmm.
what was interesting was what didn't necessarily strike me as much was the success that you've had. You have had success with this program, amazing success, but it was the
Yes.
moment that set it all into motion. And
Hmm.
you had been facing inequity at a job, a traditional role, and instead of shrinking, what you did was you chose to build. And you built, among the other things, an event planning business. And then you also had this vision for women and women in a community. And that became WIB, or Women
Hmm.
in Business. And you've just kept
Yes.
building ever since. And so I want you to take us back to that decision. And when you realized that role was no longer aligned, what gave you that conviction to build instead of to retreat?
Wow. Yeah. I, as you shared, I was working for someone else at the time. And because of a coworker, we were just having a conversation. It was a male coworker after work, and he shared his salary, and it was significantly more than I was making. And we had comparable roles. And, I'd never thought of inequity in the workplace. I was raised to just put my head down, do the work, show up, be on time. Whenever you had performance reviews, I was, always getting the high marks in my performance reviews. So that's what I thought, just like when you were in college, you perform, you get the grade. And it wasn't like that. And it had started when I worked in Washington, D.C., of seeing these things that had me thinking about women in the workplace. And then when he said his salary, and I thought, well, what am I missing? Must be missing something, because this is now example number 3 or 4 or 5 of these things happening. And I wanted to start an event planning business because I was inspired again by another woman in business that I saw. And it was the two ideas coming together at the perfect time, because I was starting Events of Joy, and then I thought about this problem, and I thought, I cannot be the only woman working, having these issues, and don't know how to work through them or solve them. And I wasn't going to go to work and say, well, what, you know, tell me
Right.
why this is happening. I wanted
Be
to create a
interesting to see
space
what
for
the
us to come
answer
together.
would have been
Right.
interesting to see what the
Right.
answer would have been, but we kind of know.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, I can't be the only woman. So I decided to start this event called Women in Business, Passing the Baton Today, Tomorrow, and Beyond Summit. That was the original name, and the idea of, passing on knowledge. And thank you so much. You are part of that history and legacy, because you were there for, I
And I have my
think,
baton
conference
still.
number 2. You still have your baton?
I
Oh my
do have my
God.
baton still, yes.
Oh my God, Anne. Yeah, because that was oh my gosh, that means the world to me, because you were there for number 2, the second conference. And
Yes.
and then have we've been connected ever since through so many different life journeys and ups and downs. And to have you there, there's a photo of us. You haven't seen it yet, but I will send it to you.
Ooh,
That our photographer captured of our embrace, and I was so excited to see it because it just shows genuine love and joy in
well,
that
oh, I
moment.
can't wait.
And so, yeah, I really appreciate it. But that was it. It was just, I I think I'm a very solutions driven person. If there's a problem, I'm always like, how can I fix this? And I wanted to use my skill as an event planner to tackle this problem. And it has evolved over 20 years. And I just absolutely feel blessed to be able to continue to do it.
I have a question. I you have an event planning business, and then you do this event,
Hmm.
Women in Business
Yes.
Summit.
Hmm.
So we had just been talking about how I'm doing the podcast and I'm having to be producer, technician, everything. So you're doing that with your those 2
Yes.
things too. So you not
Yeah.
only were creating this space for women, but you were actually
Hmm.
running the production as well, which I'm thinking of
Yes.
it now
And
was
which
not
is this
easy.
whole No, and but it was helped by some amazing women who joined my advisory board. I mean, it was my one of my favorite quotes, and is like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Oh, I
And I
love that.
love that because I came to that quote later in probably over the last like 7, 8, maybe 10 years ago. I saw it somewhere and it just stuck with me. And now I have it as my tagline on my email because I reflected on the women who said yes to being on my advisory board, my sister, friends, people I didn't know at the time, like India, who's now one of my dear friends.
Oh, yes.
And so I was doing it. Yes, I'm in charge of the production and getting our sponsors and doing all of that. But it was literally a community effort of these incredible women who continue to be part of my life and other women who have met over the, last 2 decades come together and help me to make this event possible. And I do have to switch hats because sometimes it's a very different situation when I'm planning Web Summit and then when I'm working for my clients who are a nonprofit or in the corporate world to plan their event.
Oh,
But
that's
the
true.
beautiful thing yeah, the beautiful thing though is that I get to experiment on Web Summit and just try things out and say, does this work? And then bring back that knowledge to help my clients. So it works out beautifully. I love being able to be in both worlds.
I really like that, the whole, experiment, word, you hear it
Yeah.
popping up in vernacular today, but I've used it a lot, and I think it's something I've found both in my corporate career and my
Mhm.
own entrepreneurial ventures that and creative ventures that experimentation is so important. It's trying. I
Mhm.
mean, it's really about trying and seeing what
Yes.
works, seeing what doesn't work. But you know,
Yeah.
going out there and finding new ideas, new ways to do things, which isn't
Mhm.
always so easy to do in a more structured environment.
Right. You just want to it's less I love spaces that create that opportunity for you to take risk. I had a boss like that in Washington DC. I was new in my career as an event planner and she allowed me well, I don't know if she allowed me, but when I did make big mistakes, she was there to support me. It wasn't a reprimand, it wasn't you're automatically fired. I just remember this one event that I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And thankfully I had a team around me that supported me and I had a boss who was understanding that this is still new to me and was super supportive. So I think having leaders that help you to grow and take risk because those are the folks who stand out really are the ones who don't always go with the status quo, don't ask the question that maybe everyone else is thinking, but they're afraid to ask, so you're the person who asks it. Sometimes it
Yeah.
works out, sometimes it doesn't, but I think you can't avoid taking risk and experimenting and trying if there's a freedom to it. And I can understand being cautious because I am very much a safety and security type of personality,
Risk
but I've
management.
become less so. Yeah, I've become less so by being like, okay, this is a calculated risk that I can take, and what's the worst that could happen? I want to see the results. So, yeah, gotta
And that's
experiment a little
interesting you
bit.
said that with, leaders too, because it's a two-way
Mhm.
street, because you
Mhm.
have to be careful, like, some leaders are better at giving that space to learn and, maybe not do it
Mhm.
perfectly all the time. I always found,
Mhm.
particularly in my earlier career at GE, what I really liked is that you work in your
Mhm.
role because you knew what you were doing. And sometimes you didn't, just given the circumstances, but you knew how to figure it
Right.
out. And that to me
Mhm.
was, it wasn't just saying, oh, you could go make mistakes, but it was like, okay, you own it. If something doesn't go
Right.
right, you
Right.
own it. What is it you're going to do? And I think, especially when you're building something, you almost have to be that leader to yourself and allow yourself
Mhm.
those mistakes to say, it's okay. What did you learn? Did you solve it? So it's a very interesting
Exactly.
dynamic that shifts when it's more entrepreneurial than it is where it
Mm.
might be led by someone. You had brought up about advisory,
Yeah.
committee, and I really wanna go back to
Mhm.
that because that is something I have
Oh, okay.
found, I've been on boards for nonprofits, committees, and organizations within companies I've worked for, and when I've had my own things, I've also had advisory committees, whether a little bit more
Mhm.
formalized or very informal, and I would call you one of my advisors when, I was, pulling Press Pause together and everything, and talk a little bit because to me, that is something for women especially, and I love that quote you said, "You come together,
Mhm.
and there's times when it should be something more formal, and then there's
Mhm.
sometimes where it really is just having that advisory, the people you can go to. It's not necessarily mentoring, it's not
Right.
necessarily sponsorship, it's advisory. It's like you know something about this and I
Right.
need that knowledge. Can you give me some guidance? How did you
Right.
decide that you
And
needed a
an
more
advisory, because
formal
I
yeah.
knew yeah, I knew I didn't know everything. I was when I was operating off passion when I started Whip Summit and Events of Joy. And, my sister named Events of Joy because it's named for my mom. So
Mom.
my family was my first base of advisory board members. And then I looked out and saw women who knew things that I didn't know. So India, she was a marketing person at the time, and she was
Yeah.
involved in media. And I knew we needed some kind of media support. I didn't know what that looked like to write a press release, but she did. I'm thinking of my sister who's an engineer, and she has that very analytical brain and she's also very creative. So she actually designed our first program pamphlet, which was really cool. I think of Erin was an event planner, and she was also very meticulous and did independent event planning, which is very different than if you work for a facility and you're planning the things there, because you have a very there's a script and there's a system to that, and it's very different when you're an independent planner planning an event that involves marketing, sponsorship, messaging, and crafting that around, in addition to the details of food and beverage, audio, visual, et cetera, et cetera. So I knew I held the vision, and then I brought in these folks who said yes. And then I had someone was a money person, finance, who was able to,
Yeah.
look at our budget, and we came up with a sponsorship package based on our expenses and projected income. And so I knew I didn't know all of those things, and I thought it was just instinctual for me to and I still know I don't know everything. So I always try to
Well, you
surround
never
myself
are
with
going to.
women who, yeah, you're not. So why would this was the first time I'm trying this, and I thought it would be fun. And we pulled that because it was in November, our first, and then our first event was in March. So, think of the holidays and after. So it was a very short planning window, and we pulled it off, and it was incredible. So I think having those people in your life, whether it's someone you can call at 3 a.m. because you need that emotional support, or that person in your life that is going to give it to you straight with love, 'Cause, for
Right,
me, it's
right.
like, if you're gonna tell it to me, like, cushion it a little bit for me, please, you know?
Just a little bit.
Or yeah, or those people that you can call for comedic relief. You have that relationship with different people in your life. Some of them are, you see every day, and others you see every once in a while, but they're connected to you and they ultimately want you to succeed and feel, supported. So I think that community is really, really important, and identifying those people in your life who you can call on for those different things. Yeah.
And I'll go a step further that it's not just
Yeah.
identifying within the circles of people you know, but it's always getting out
Mhm.
there and meeting new people because sometimes you have to seek what you need and,
Oh my gosh.
and it's really important. And what I really want to stress, especially for people who are listening in here, is these people don't just kind of fall in front of you. Like, you do have to research a little bit, but
Mhm.
people are so wonderful if you ask them, and I would say this is true of mentorship, sponsorship, or
Yeah.
advisory, but you need to be able
Mhm.
to simply and clearly articulate what it is that you would like the person to do for you. And I've been on the
Right.
receiving end where somebody will approach me,
Mhm.
and when it's kind of broad and big, I can't grasp because I'm gonna want to really provide value to the
Right.
person, so help me know if you give me what you want me to help you do or know or
Mhm.
say, I can zero in on that. Have you
Yeah.
found that,
I
like,
think
when
you're
you're
absolute Yes, you're absolutely right, Anne, because you said something. You said, you have to get out and meet because it's not always the people that are in your community. And I know for as an introverted person, going out and meeting people, you may want to just retreat. But thankfully, my job, it's a part of it. You have to go out and meet people, and it does not have to be forced. And I think you're absolutely right. Having an idea in mind of this is an area that I need advice in. If you've authored a book. So if I'm looking to author my first book and I specifically come to you, what would talk to me about the writing process, talk to me about how you got your book published, or you've spoken at events, you've been all over the place speaking, and I would specifically want to know, how do you get comfortable, what can I do to create a press kit for myself. So those, having a very specific thing that you have in mind, just like with our advisory board this year. I'm so excited over the years, I've been really, really blessed to be surrounded by incredible women. And this year's advisory board is just, another group of women that I get to have the privilege of working with. But it was on me to go in before we had our first meeting and decide, and this was a leadership thing for me to develop. Why am I inviting these women to be part of the advisory board? What value that I already see in them that I know they're going to bring, and then have them operate in their gifts. I would never approach someone of, g- to do something that I know that I just want them to flow with what they already do. So before we even had our first meeting, I thought about these incredible women, and I thought, what would how can they leave their stamp on Web Summit, their gift through their gifts? And so I think that's very, very important.
I really like that about how you leave your stamp because, it's so funny
Mhm.
because it's very similar to what we do in our jobs that, you have your performance
Yes.
reviews or, whatever they
Mhm.
call them today. And I know that there's
Mhm.
different ways people approach that, but you have to do that to yourself, and I do think it's a little bit you have to kinda push yourself to be a little bit more of a self-assessment, and sometimes we're our worst we're like the absolute worst person because we're so, like,
Mhm.
banging ourselves of what we're not doing right, but it's also saying, "Okay, what is the value that I've brought? What am I doing? What am I proud of myself for?"
Yes.
And it's kinda going through the same process. That's why I like to, I keep a notebook, I guess
Mhm.
you'd call it a journal, but I really keep in there, a tracking of how I'm doing. I always even in
Mhm.
careers, I always say to people, "Do that. You're not gonna remember."
Mhm.
So you learn and build by
Yeah.
that.
ask people who you trust, to
Yeah.
give you that kind of feedback of what they see in you, because it has shaped the decisions that I make, what I say yes to and what I say no to, more than over the years. As I was coming through my career, it would be, oh, absolutely, I can do that. Now I'm finding I'm having a little bit more discernment on what I say yes to, because I question if it's a part of my value. I question if it aligns with my values. I question if it is something that's going to make the world a better place. Like, I really go through these questions of, what am I doing it for me, or am I doing it for the image that I want to project? Because we had, before we started recording, you talked about ego. Man, that thing
Yeah.
can get you if you're not careful. Am I doing it for ego, or am I really doing it because it's genuine and something that I want to be involved in? So getting to know yourself, understanding values is important.
Ego
Mhm.
has come up in so many conversations I've had with other women, just even like where we go out to
Yeah.
lunch and we're talking about where we're at in our careers, and it's a very interesting thing because ego can be a very good thing in
Mhm.
terms of our confidence and, feeling good about, what our skills are and what we're delivering. And then ego can be the thing that just if you just
Mhm.
let that leash go a little bit, it's like it takes off
Yes.
on you. So and then understanding, I think what it ties more back to, you know, I call this hindsight because there's a lot of hindsight you
Mhm.
gain over time, but there's a lot of women I'm hoping are listening who are at very different points in their careers. And I think that you have to manage that ego to to do for
Yeah,
you what you need it to do in the circumstance you find yourself in. And I think as you get to the
it's
hindsight
true.
position, they say hindsight's 2020. It's looking back, you can see it a little bit clearer, but going through it
Mhm.
in in the world that you're as a woman navigating through anyhow, it's
Yeah.
really hard because ego gets perspective gets interpreted differently and translated differently depending who it is you're
Mhm.
working and what the environment is you're working. And it's
Agreed.
not to say good people, bad people, whatever, it's just it's the culture that we have to come up in, and I think we all have said
Mhm.
ego for us, it is ego as we look at what's next because we've worked so hard to get to where we
Yeah.
are and to do what we've done in our careers, and it has not been easy all
Yeah.
the time. So, that ego comes in,
Mm-mm.
it's not necessarily always good or bad, but it's a fuzzy place in between because you wanna be proud for what you've been able to accomplish, and then how do you translate
Mhm.
that into what's next?
Very true. And I was listening to I went to an event this past Sunday hosted by Nicole Polite, who is also an incredible entrepreneur, and her event was called She Decides. And I
Saw that.
love that because all of the speakers reflected and shared just these incredible nuggets. And I wish I could recall the speaker who said this, but she was talking about how, you know, not to be careful, but be aware of what you're doing, and that's not performative, that it's not just for applause, that is truly what you want to be doing. And she talked about letting go of what everyone else was applauding her for. So she had great long hair. She cut her hair because that suited her. She let her hair, the grays come in because that suited her,
I didn't know
and
that.
it that is brave to be able to really be introspective, um, and I think that just comes with time, and really, I'm in that place of why ask myself, is this still something that I love doing when it comes to, especially when it comes to Web Summit and event planning? Is it still something that I love doing? Why am I doing this? Is the passion still there? And sometimes there was one year where it wavered a little bit, and I was like, oh, because it was a tough, challenging year. But then it came right back. I was like, yes, I want to do it. I can't picture my life without it. But I think it was important for me to go through that exercise and to always in my mind know that I'm not gonna know everything, and it's really fun. And I'm still curious, and I still wanna, see it's really fun to be at Web Summit and see people who've been a part of it and listen to their stories, and creating that space for women to gather and to share and to uplift each other. It's been really, really rewarding experience, but then watching it take on a life of its own and be able to stand
Yeah.
back and say, that's them, that's not me. So,
You just a couple of things. One is
mm,
when you said there was a time you questioned that passion. Is it still there? I've had that happen a few times in my life
yeah.
and career where I remember one time was communications, corporate communications work where I questioned,
Mm,
like, I almost felt a little burnt out. And
yeah.
and then I ended up experimenting, doing other things. I did Press Pause Now, Press
Mhm.
Pause Moments, the
Ah,
book, got my MFA,
I love it.
and then all of a sudden, like, when I went back, I was like, "Yeah, I really love what I do here," and it's always changing. That's one thing I was able to do in that career was
Yeah.
always change it. But the other piece of it is that, the other the other time it was with my writing that I had raising kids, getting in it. I got the MFA, but then had health things kinda come up in the family, and I had to put the writing to the side after having the book Press Pause
Mhm.
Moments, after having all this, and then I started to come back, and I actually was afraid because I was like, "Did I forget everything I knew?" And it was starting the process again, but realizing
Mhm.
the writer I am now is different than the writer I was 10, 15 years ago, and if you recall, I also wrote for a number of,
Mhm.
like, Traveling Mom and a couple of other
Mm,
things, so it
yes.
was always about being like, "Ooh, the working mom who's, like, juggling all
Mhm.
this and is a writer too, my adventures," or whatever I said, and then all of a sudden, like, I did that, I got the kids
Mhm.
off, and it's I'm still doing it, discovering what my voice is, and again, to
Yeah.
to the point of advisors and just support people and everything. I have a number of people who we were all in the same boat, got our MFAs, and then life
Mhm.
took over. So it's very I
Yeah.
say it because don't I always try to give the advice or words of wisdom, whatever you wanna call it. There are discouraging times, and the moments where I've gotten to the other side in a different place is when I've had to go through the discouragement and the questioning, and it's hard to go through, but it
Mhm.
really when you say all those questions, you ask yourself, if you're honest with yourself, they're not easy. Well, but you get to that other side.
Yeah, and you said something so key was when you said I had my corporate communications job and I was doing great, and then you stepped away to do all these other things with press pause and press pause moments. I have to just shout you out again, and I always will for press pause because I was at a season in my life where I went to your retreat, your press pause retreat. I have press pause moments, your book, and it was giving myself that permission to I'd never heard that before, just pause and reflect. I was there with my mom. You created and curated this
That's right.
beautiful environment for us. It was so peaceful, and you were able to slow us down, reflect on the past, and then dream about the future. And I thought about the rat race of a work world that I was in, even
Yeah,
especially in my early 20s. I was working 70 hours, 70 plus hours a week, when I went to DC, and loved it. Like, there's nothing I wouldn't take anything away from that experience because it molded me, and it helps you to see what you want, what you don't want, how you wanna develop your life. Um, and so just having that change, that shift for you, that then rippled out into my life, that then caused me to ripple out into other women's lives is so important.
right.
So it's never a mistake when you question yourself or when you try and when you experiment, because you never know where that leads. And it can lead you back to understanding how passionate you are about what you're really great at. So I
And
thank
I
you for
think
press pause.
oh, thing and yeah, and press pause is still it's been a little dormant, but it keeps getting resurrected, so looking at that,
Yes, because
it's
we won't
and
let
it's
you forget it.
I know, and it's interesting because I was at when I did that, I was at the point in my life
Mhm.
where, I mean, stepping away for me was leaving a big job, a very demanding job as I was having my children, and then
Yeah.
going to a demanding job that was a little bit less demanding to get my MFA. And so
Mhm.
that was the paradigm I lived in, was like, "Oh, I just will go to a company
Yeah.
where I'm not doing external communications as much,"
Mhm.
and that means it's better, you know, but it was still very demanding. It still was a lot of, a lot of things going on, um, and so, like, it was that perspective of being that driven or committed to career, and to your point, I
Mhm.
don't regret any of it,
Mm.
but stepping back, that was sort of it really was therapeutic for me, I think, even holding it myself, because that was I just had never paused, and I recognize that that's something we all have to
Mhm.
do, and you don't have to go to a retreat, you don't even I will book a hotel in the Cape for a couple of days, and I'll bring my laptop, and I'll go by
Yes.
myself, and I'll write, and I'll go walk on the beach. That's when I question, I write these things called, random essays, and I just type, and I just kinda
I
get
love
out
it.
all my thinking, and, that's a press pause moment for me, at this point in my life.
I think it's so important, and also it makes you can make you a better employee to just have something else going on other than work. And I just love when bosses give their employee that space. And I know we're probably not in that environment. I hear all of the issues, but if you can cultivate space for your people to grow and invest in their personal development as well as their professional development, it just makes for a more pleasant work environment. I found any team that I've been on where my boss, especially, I think Andrea Nacy's was my boss in DC, and I love being on her team because she gave us that space and she invested in us and our training. Not saying that our environment was perfect, but I can point back to her, my first boss, Rick Dean, when I first started out in my career. Those two people didn't have to, but their leadership style allowed for their people to have space to grow. And I really, really appreciated that. And when you have different interests and when you can bring those learnings back to work, it just makes for more better productivity and morale and all of those things that really do matter. I mean, I was listening to someone who said, I was overhearing conversation, and the person said, I've been here for so long, and the other person said, well, how long? And it's like 2 years, time to look for another job. And I was like, 2 years. you know Meanwhile, here we are, like, invested in 30-year career. We're committed to companies. So there's a difference. There is a shift in what people consider longevity, but it's
And
funny.
I do think though there's such diversity in companies now in terms of people who've been there a long
Mm,
time, people who haven't been there a long time,
right.
early career, middle career, late career, and it's just all
Mhm.
that combined knowledge with curiosity, uh,
Mm,
experimentation, innovation. We say these words to the point that I'm not sure we're always thinking about what they mean, but they're so important
right.
because they bring everyone has their different I don't know, sometimes I call them gifts, but they have the wiring in their
Yes.
brain that they bring to the party. And just like any kind of
Mhm.
complex system, there's different wiring in different places, different
Mhm.
mechanisms that go into place. So bringing that all together, I think, is so important. So,
Yeah, and understanding your employees because you're to your point, there's so many different generations that are working together, and I that's why I love events. That's why I love, bringing people together and creating that space because if I'm in front of you and we're having discussions and we're doing a networking event together or we're doing working on a project together outside of work and we're getting to understand each other, it makes it easier to communicate. It brings empathy into the conversation. And so, yeah, I love events because in this age of technology and all the conveniences that we have, I think the human connection is just the most important thing. So
it
when you
still
can
is,
create space
always
for
will
that to
be.
happen, it has to always be at the center of everything that we do. Yes, you can have your online training, but how much more fun is a training in person versus online?
Oh, it's such a
Where you
different
get to,
experience.
yeah, yeah.
I'm always thankful that we do have the opportunity to I've done training that I could not get to physically, and so having that
Hmm.
opportunity and I've taught in teaching too during COVID,
Oh, yeah.
we had to, pivot really quickly and teach online,
Hmm.
and what you do is you figure out where the ways that you can engage, but there is nothing that
Hmm.
replaces person-to-person activity, and
Agreed.
being together and just having that, like you said, the connection between, each
Hmm.
others. So, we are nearing the end of a great
Yes.
conversation. I have 2 more questions. The first one is for you, and it's as you look back over 20 years, how have you had to grow in order to sustain what you started and continue forward?
I really thought when you said the question, I had the answer. I think the biggest lesson is that I don't know everything and to always continue to work on myself, my communication skills, my mental health, my joy, because life comes at you fast sometimes and losing my husband suddenly, health challenges the same, all the life stuff that happens, family members not being healthy, losing loved ones, like all of it.
Yeah,
And you're still showing up for work, you're still showing up for your family. It's just understanding that in all of that, continue to assess your priorities, know your values, and let that be the guiding star for you. Know who loves you and, surround yourself with lots of joy. But that's been, I think, the thing that I have said many prayers, like asking God to just help me through the next day. And I have an incredible mom who she knows
love your
before
mom.
she knows when I'm upset before I know I'm upset. Like she,
We should just shout
so
out to
having that
Joy.
shout out to Joy, the greatest of all time. Like she set that foundation for me to be able to um be resilient, be persistent, be committed. And I really am just curious. With being an entrepreneur is not easy, has not been easy, continues to be challenging. But I always come back to why am I doing this? Is it bringing me joy? And I, as long as I can continue to commit and feel that feeling, that genuine feeling of, okay, I'm committed to this, then I keep moving on. So the lesson for me has always been to remain open, to be curious, to go to those places and people that bring me joy and know that I don't know everything. And then align myself with the people that can help me to, achieve these goals that I have. Because I have a dream box, and I don't know if it's right here.
Oh,
Hold on, let me see if I can grab and bring it in the frame. Ugh, it's on
a
my
dream
my
box, I
desk.
love it.
This is it. This is my dream box. And there's
Oh,
so many things in here
is
that
that like
I
index
still
cards?
have. Yeah. And
Oh,
I
I love
write
it.
what I these things that I these dreams that I want to achieve. And so I'm prayerful that I get the years to achieve them. because I was inspired. I went to another women's conference. That's the other thing. I go to a lot of events, and I saw Martha Stewart's in her 80s talking about
Oh,
her
yes.
next, and I'm like, that's incredible. It's
Yeah.
never too late. There's always time to do all the things. So yeah,
Oh, yeah,
that's what I
it's a
would say
very
about that.
it's an interesting thing because you come to a point where, again, I think it's cultural in some ways that you're reaching this end point, and it's like, no, you keep going. It's just a different
It's just
lane of the
different.
highway that you're
Yeah.
going into. And you said one thing I want to shout out
Mhm.
before I ask you the last question is that about mental health. And I do, and it ties to
Yes.
the idea of community, and it ties to, I think, what I was trying to
Mhm.
achieve with Press Pause Now Retreat is that it is tough. Life is tough. And there's
Mhm.
roller coaster exhilaration, wonderful times, and there's the times that are really
Yeah.
pretty scary and or we don't expect. And that taking care of yourself physically and mentally and spiritually for me is a huge, huge thing.
Mhm.
And I don't know that I was
Yes.
very good at it for a lot of my life and career, but I learned to be better
Yeah.
at it. And so I would just say that that's another reason I think community of women and going to events like Women in Business Summit is so important because you talk to other people and other women who go through the same things. And that
Yeah.
just if anything I wish I had learned earlier was that
Mhm.
that's so beneficial to just know that, the
Yeah.
things that we go through are really pretty common. They're not just us being chosen and
Yeah.
being thrown
Right.
down the roller coaster.
No one's out
So
to get you. Right.
no. So the last question I have for you is really for the women who are listening to this podcast who are feeling called to build something for themselves.
Mm.
And what mattered the most to you in terms of staying committed when that path wasn't easy? So you talked about the joy,
Mm.
that kind of inspires you, but what was that thing that just didn't let you give up?
Mm. I take example from my mom. I'll bring her up again because I never saw her give up. She's single parent of 4 girls, and I never saw her give up. And so I know it's by her leading by example. I also, you tell me I can't do something, I'm gonna figure out how to.
I
So
think
then
it's called
there's that. I'm a little
stubbornness.
stubborn in that way. Yeah, I was like, say I'm a little stubborn in that way. So there's some stubbornness there for sure. And then the success that you have propels you to the next thing. And then I read books like 3 Feet from Gold that tells me I'm just so close, to keep going. And then I check in with myself and say, do I still like this? Do I still love this? And the answer is yes. What I will say though, for someone who wants to build something, any risk taker, is knowing your level of risk. And
Mhm.
especially if you're also in a relationship, know your partner's level of risk. Because there were times my husband was like, why are you doing this? You're so stressed out. And I'm like, leave me alone and stress out. It's my stress, you know.
That's a great
So
point.
also knowing, yeah, knowing your level of risk, like what you know, can you risk the money that you're about to risk and invest in your business? Can your partner risk that money going towards your business? What dreams do you have together? Especially if you're in a partnership versus what dream do you have solo? And do you have a partner that can support that and be joyful for you as you rise and fall and rise and fall, or rise, or fall, fall, fall. Like knowing your whole environment. I think I'll
Yeah,
say
your
that, but for me,
ecosystem.
yeah, for me, I remember starting it and it just all flowed. So I completely went on passion. And I think if I'd paused to evaluate the risk, we wouldn't be having this conversation about Web Summit 20 years on. I think
Yeah.
if I'd um, let fear take over, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But you also have to know yourself well enough to know. if this is something that you do. I talk to people, I could never be an entrepreneur. I need to know that in 2 weeks I'm getting a paycheck. You know? I need to know that this is the predicted outcome. But I was also in a situation where I was laid off, and then I that for me was like another turning point of, do I want to keep doing this, or do I want to go for myself and do this hard? Because Nicole Walters, who's a speaker and author, she would say, "Pick, choose your hard." So I've chosen this hard, and I absolutely would choose it again. So
Well, you have been, a dear friend, as well as
same.
you have continuously inspired me. I mean, since the first day I met you, I remember sitting in a
It's
Starbucks,
mutual.
and, so I wanna thank you because I could just keep
Thank
talking
you.
to Keisha, but, thank you, the clarity of that vision and that commitment that you made to build it over time, and that resilience and that patience and impatience is just so powerful. So thank you for
Thank you,
sharing your
Anne.
story here, and thank you to everyone who is listening. This is Hindsight and High Heels.